Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Indra Rinzler. Indra is an astrologer and spiritual guide who has been providing readings for more than 50 years. He has traveled the world offering sessions and classes in both the United States and Asia. Indra is also the host of the YouTube channel Moving Beyond. Welcome, Indra. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you so much, Tanya. It's really good to be here.
So you and I, we're going to dive into Vedic astrology, shining light on awareness within. And so, Indra, I'm a little knowledgeable on astrology myself, but I'm not knowledgeable at all on Vedic astrology. I mean, I know I am an Aries sun, Taurus moon, Libra rising. That's what I know about myself. But you ask me anything else and I have no clue. So I thought it'd be fun today to talk about this. You know, what is Vedic astrology? How does it differ from other astrologies? And let's dive into this a little bit.
So Vedic astrology is the astrology of India. The astrology of it itself, I like to say, well, the astrology of itself isn't much different than Western, but I like to say that the Western don't agree with the Western and the Vedic don't agree with the Vedic. And so if the Western and the Vedic don't agree, that's just part of astrology. The signs are the same, the planets are the same, though we don't use the outer planets and we don't use asteroids, though some people do. But the main difference, and the most important difference, is that the chart is cast slightly differently. The Western astrology is based on the seasons, that's the relationship between the sun and the earth. It's the seasons. And so March 21st is Aries 0 every year. But Vedic astrology is based on what we call sidereal time versus tropical time in Western. Sidereal time is start time. And so we take into account the earth, and then we take into account the sun and then the stars behind the sun. And the stars behind the sun aren't the same every year. And so the astrology is based on where the planets actually are. So when the Western astrologer says, hold on, full moon in Leo, chances are that the moon is actually in the constellation of Cancer. It moves backwards.
Oh.
And so we're 24 degrees difference. And so when you say a Leo sun, that's most likely a Cancer sun. A Taurus moon is most likely an Aries moon, and a Libra rising is most likely a Virgo rising.
Oh, wow.
And there are people that hear that and then say, wow, I never felt like a Leo sun. I felt more like a Cancer sun. And then there are people that say, I don't recognize that at all. And then we get into the discussion and then they start recognizing it.
Yeah, and I would say that, Indra, about myself, I don't feel like an Aries sun. I feel, I'm a cusp. I'm that first day of Aries, so I feel that water aspect of me more. But how do you know?
I'm sorry, you said an Aries sun?
Yeah, I'm an Aries sun.
I thought you had said okay, I'm sorry. I thought you had said a Leo sun. So an Aries sun becomes a Pisces. So in fact, you are water.
Mm-hmm.
So there you are. Yes, absolutely. Your Aries would be your moon would move into Aries, but the Aries isn't your sun. Your sun would be a Pisces.
Oh,
especially if it's cuspy.
It's very cuspy.
And
I feel very cuspy. So, okay, so now there's this concept of there's now 13 signs when we were told there were 12. What is all of this about?
I mean, there's is Pluto a planet?
Yeah.
There's 13 signs. Is it sidereal or tropical? This is just part of astrology. I was on a website, a Facebook group yesterday, and I made a comment about Saturn, and the leader of the group says, that's about, you're talking about Venus, you're not talking about Saturn. So I mean, disagreements are integral to astrology, and I like to say that every book in astrology contains truth, but no book contains the whole truth.
Yeah, you're right. And so Can you talk a little bit about the history of Vedic astrology? Like, how far back does it go? And, some of that
Well,
information.
the astrology, I believe that the astrology was started in Mesopotamia in about 5,000 years ago. It started as a divination that the king gods realized that they needed to make decisions, and because they were king gods, they didn't want to be vulnerable. They didn't want to make a mistake, so they got the idea that if they had somebody else make the decision, a minister, then they could still be, if it was wrong, then they could blame the minister. Now, the ministers realized that if they got it wrong, they would be killed. And so what they came up with is the divination, that the omenology was
Mhm.
started. And so the idea is that when the king asks the questions, the birds are flying east. He says, should we go to war with the eastern people? And the birds fly east. And so the minister says, yep, look, the birds are flying east. And then when they asked about when to plant, if the sun was shining, they said plant. If the sun wasn't shining, they said hold off. And so they figured out omens or other ways to look. And between in the 2000 BC millennium, they killed millions of animals and millions of humans because God was so smart that he put the answer to the question in the direction of the gallbladder or the
Oh,
liver was facing. And so they would cut them open and kill them in order to figure out what the gods were saying. So I mean, it started on a pretty basic way, and it came down to the end of Mesopotamia, and the teachings of astrology went west to Greece and Egypt, and it went east to India. So the same basic teachings, and then they were adjusted accordingly. And of course, some of those adjustments then passed back and forth later on into
yeah.
I mean, the Greeks were big on it. Ptolemy, and in the 2000 years ago, well, the big tell was, this: does the sun circle the earth, or does the earth circle the sun? This was for 1500 years. This is the big question,
That's going to make a big difference in your astrology reading, right?
well, it's going to make a big difference in how you do astrology, that's for sure.
So, how do we know that the information we have now is correct?
Well, we know. I mean, you're telling me as an empath. You're telling me, how do we know? You're asking me, how do we
Yeah,
know
I'm
it's
just
correct?
I'm
We
just
do the
joking.
same.
I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, yeah. No, the way we know is we trust our gut, because
Yeah.
there isn't. You have to. I mean, this is all of life. You have to use a discernment. How do you know who to marry? How do you know which course to take? How do you know which bus to get on? How do you know which route to go of the three routes? It all depends on what you feel at the time. There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, right. And so, Indra, when you're doing a reading, what information do you need on someone? Do you need the date of birth, the time of birth, the location? Is that similar, or can you just
That's
pick up
it.
on people's energy? How does that work for you?
No, I do a chart. I mean, I actually, the way it works for me, we do the chart, and I do the reading. And what happens for me is that there's a place in the reading, I would say towards the middle and later, is that I start getting what I call intuition. And what I feel it is I feel it's from the client's higher self.
Mhm.
Now, it could be astral, it could be channeling, but the way I've experienced it is that it comes from the higher self of the other person. And they're it's kind of like they say to me, ask about my childhood. And I'm thinking, well, I wasn't thinking about your childhood. But then I will say, maybe it's about your childhood. And they'll say, whoa, yeah, let's look at that. And so what happens is that the reading, the reading, you start with the basic information in order to get a dialogue going, and you're expressing the places of the strengths and weaknesses. That's basically what I'm doing with the chart, is giving the strengths and weaknesses. I'm not into predictions. I'm not interested in giving people the better life. the better life will come. I want to help them with their strengths and weaknesses, because when they're more grounded in themselves and they have more understanding, then the intuition will take over in order to help them whatever it is that they want to do. And so once I laid down these groundworks that are static in the sense that if you're Aries sun, I will say the same things. If it's in the fourth house, I will say the same things. But then, things start changing and taking over based on the intuition and how the energy develops. I don't really know where it's going to go. I will look at a chart and get an idea of a couple of things, and then, like when you start podcasting with someone and you feel the energy, like
Uh-huh.
then you get a direction. And so the direction, I don't know where I'm going to end up, and I don't know afterwards, I don't know where I've ended up, because there's more later on that comes that gives me even more clarity, that sometimes I give back to the client and sometimes not.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that because I do that too. My intuitive sessions, I don't know what to expect. I mean, the client will tell me a list of things that they are struggling with or whatnot, but oftentimes we're veered over in a completely different direction, which then ultimately ripples over into the areas that they need assistance in. So I can completely resonate or, kind of feel where you're coming from in that. It's like you don't really know. You're just kind of going based off of their higher self and your higher self kind of connecting and saying, what is the most pertinent at this time with the energy that's coming forward. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I do is that I ask people, I have four questions I ask them at the beginning, and I tell them that they can answer them all, or they don't have to answer any of them. But the four questions are: do you have any questions that you want answered? How are you doing? Why do you want the reading, and what's up for you? And I basically take notes on it. And I'm not using that to direct the reading. But what I do at the end is I come back to what they say, because then I have more wisdom about what they're saying, and I have a not it's not so much but the intuition about what they're saying. And they say, I don't know what to do. And I come back and I say, well, it's not that you know what to do. I say at the end. I may say it at the beginning, or I may think it, but at the end I say, look, the whole reading was about intuition. You say you don't know what to do, and I say you do know what to do. And they say, oh yeah, you're right. And so I use their words to
Mhm.
be able to direct at the end, and also to use their words to realize how, because each word is poignant. When they say, um, I can't think of an example. They say, I don't know what to do. So it's like about doing, that it's not about doing, it's about being. And so
Mhm.
that's, I use their words back to them in order to, because it's their language and it's their conundrum, and to break through with their conundrum rather than my, you know, uh, uh, you know, life is a bitch or whatever, I'm just thinking, kind of a general statement that doesn't really deal with it. But when I use their words, I feel that it's really powerful, that they say, wow, yes, that's what I really mean. And that's what is underneath. I find it to be a very important time in the reading.
It is. It's powerful because we're all mirrors of one another. And oftentimes we're going, seeking others for validation. I had a client the other day and I felt like I'm like, why am I having a session with you? You already knew all of this. That's what I was thinking. But the reality was, is I was validating it for her. I could see the light bulb going off in her mind, like, oh, okay, yes, yes. And so, and I noticed that with myself. Sometimes it's like I've got to reach out to another healer and an astrologer or another
Yeah.
modality and say, hey, sometimes we have blind spots and I can't see beyond my own blind spot, but someone else can come in, like say a fulcrum, act as a fulcrum and help leverage me to the next, level. And I don't always see that within myself. Sometimes I've got to have someone else mirror that back to me.
Well, there are levels of knowing, and that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Indra, let's talk a little bit about the houses. When you say the fourth house, what does that mean in Vedic astrology?
Well, it means the same in Western. The houses, you divide the chart into 12 houses, and that each house has the area of your life that that is dealt in that house. And let's see what else to say about them. Do you want me to go through the
Yeah, let's
houses?
go
I
through
mean,
them because, for
okay.
me, when I get a reading, I understand the signs and whatnot, but then getting into the other terminologies, I don't necessarily understand what that means.
Okay, so let me back up if I will. Let me give you my quick elevator talk here. So the idea here is that the planets, there's three elements: planet signs and houses, and you're just talking about the houses part of it. But there's three elements as planet signs and houses. Planets are like verbs. They're action items: emote, Moon, or expand, Jupiter, or action, Mars. So the signs are like adjectives, they're qualities of energy: fiery, earthy, airy, and watery. And the houses are like nouns, they're places in our life,
Oh.
like houses in our like rooms in our house.
Mhm.
Like the bathroom is for bathing, the kitchen is for cooking, and the bedroom is for sleeping, and the living room is for playing and such. And so the first house is of self, it's personality or ego or a self-definition. And the second house is, I call it basic necessities. It's the first house after the first house, so it's how we enter life, because the first house is mostly about ourselves. And so now the second house, now we're getting into life, and so it's our basic necessities. The third house is mind, it's intellectual, it's communication. The fourth house is the grounding house. It's our ancestors. It's our a groundedness in ourself. It's our opening our heart, feeling connected to ourself. It's a compassion and self-forgiving. The fifth house is creativity. The sixth house is physical plane obstacles. It's the only one that has the uphills. It's the difficulties that we have in life. The seventh house, which is opposite from the first house now, is relationships. It's the outside self, which is our relating to other people. So it's relationships. The eighth house is transformation. The ninth house we call the house of spirituality, but the ninth house is, it doesn't have to be spirituality. It's whatever floats your boat. Seeing as you got that lake behind you, whatever floats your boat, whether it's kayaking, mountain climbing, or crocheting, it
Or
doesn't matter.
rafting.
But it's wherever you put your energy and your passion, and that's your spirit. And so that's why we call it spirituality. The 10th house is said to be career, because it's the place of the noon sun, it's the highest point in the sky, and it's how people see you. And so we call that the how people, so if you say, well, what do you do, people will say, well, I'm an astrologer, because we define who we are by what we do. And then the 11th house is the great physical plane gain. I like to think of it as realization. It's sort of the culmination of all of the aspects. It's a very high frequency, the 11th house. And some people understand that but maybe don't live it, and
Uh-huh.
other people don't really understand it and may try to live it. They live it but not really, because they don't really understand it. They can be very spiritual but not have a plan in the 11th house. And the 12th house is about transitions. It's an ethereal house. It's the ungrounded house. And I like to say about the 12th house is that my theory is this, well, that we probably live many lives. Okay, I
Yeah.
don't want to say anything for sure, but we probably live many lives. And if we did it on a percentage basis, because we're in essence, that, and maybe you have an idea of this, that on a percentage basis we spend most of our time in the ethereal plane or other planes. And whether that's, the small amount is 2% or 5% or 20%. 20% is still rather small. It's still 80% of the time we're then in the body. And so, uh and I don't, I mean, excuse me, whether it's 20% in the body, then it would be 80% ethereal, and still that's a large time outside. So the 12th house energies, the goal there is to bring them down to the physical plane. I figure we spend enough time on the ethereal plane that rather than getting into putting my hands over my head, rather than getting into the energies up here, bring them down to the physical plane. So if you've got Mars up there, bring the doing down to the physical plane. If you've got Jupiter down there, bring your expansion down to the physical plane. Bring what's ever there down to the bring Moon. Bring the emotions down to the physical plane. Deal with it here, because you'll have a chance to do it on the ethereal. I don't think it's telling you go to the ethereal plane, because
Yeah,
we spend enough time there. We're in the body. It's time to be down here with the energy.
absolutely.
So
And so I
that's the
love that. Thank
houses.
you for explaining all those houses. I've never heard that before. I just hear people say I'm in my third house, or, and I didn't really even understand what that meant. So, Indra, what does it mean? I have a friend who had a reading and they told her she was a grand trine, I think is what she said. Trine, I think is the word. What
Yeah.
does that mean?
Well, that means that she has planets that are 120 degrees apart. If you think of is it an isosceles triangle?
Yeah, I think
It's like
so. Hmm.
the first, fifth, and ninth house, but it could be the second, sixth, and 10th house would be
Hmm.
the same triangle, and so there are some different meanings. I'm not exactly sure what this Western astrologer, if it's a Western astrologer, might have said about them. I think that the trines, I think they consider to be really good, and the squares they consider to be not as good. And I kind of look at them a little bit differently. I kind of am more interested what you don't have, because if you don't have planets in a trine, then it's more about what you're missing than about what you're getting. And
Hmm.
I don't think it's all that important. I think there are things that are much more important. I think that if you got a planet that's in a sign that it's not happy, I think that that's much more important to you than the fact that you have a trine, or the cross is the 90-degree
Oh,
squares.
okay. So,
I don't think those are particularly important.
yeah. And so does each sign correlate with a planet like Aries and Mars, or is there a correlation there?
So this is very important correlation. It's like you say you're a watery person. So how do you do when water is frozen? How do you do when you're not near water? The thing is that each planet has signs that it's very comfortable in. In fact, they may be the ruler of those signs, and then they've got signs that they don't like at all. And so if you're like like if you're in Idaho, you're probably a winter person. Now, how do you do in the
Oh, I'm the
desert?
opposite.
Probably you're a summer person, you don't like the cold.
I like spring, summer, and fall. I don't love the winter. Yeah.
Okay, but that's not my point. My point
Yeah, I
is
know.
is that
I'm just picking.
if you're up there for skiing, when you go to the desert and there's no tree. When I go to New Mexico, it's nice, but I kind of miss the trees.
Yeah.
I'm
No, I
not
hear you.
saying I'm a forest person, but when I go to New Mexico, when I've been there, I kind of enjoy it there, but I kind of miss the trees. My point being, going back to your question, is that the signs are very comfortable. Excuse me. Some planets are very comfortable in some signs. Each planet has signs that they're very comfortable in, that they're neutral to, and that they don't like at all. And the ones that when you have a planet in a sign that it's comfortable in, that's a strength, and you can access the energy of that planet, and you can access so that means that you're able to, if it's Mars, then you're very active and can do, and you don't self-sabotage yourself with what you do. But if a planet is in a sign that it's not comfortable with, then we call that a weakness, and you have trouble accessing that energy of that planet. And so if it's Mercury, then you have trouble communicating, that's in an unhappy sign. If it's Mars, then you have trouble moving forward. If it's Moon, then you easily get emotional, that you have a strong sensitivity, but you take that sensitivity into your emotional side rather than being being intuitive and sensitive about a situation, you identify with it, and that takes you out of your it puts you in your head and your emotions rather than your feelings.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. I need to look a little bit more into that then with my chart. I have a question. I've always had this question. I do past life regressions. I do quantum healing hypnosis. I believe in past lives. My question to you is, do you think before we're born, we sign up with our astrological chart as to what we want to experience? So I say I signed up to be a Pisces Aries cusp. I came in at this time. This is the planet I came in to be attached to. This is, I literally drew a blueprint for myself because this is what I wanted to experience in this lifetime.
Absolutely, but I don't know that you did it. But yes, I do. And in fact, I read a book by someone, not an astrology book, but there was a kind of an aside in a book by a man who I really believe talks truth. And he says that at birth, the moment of death is already planned. But he says, interestingly enough, you probably believe that, he says, interestingly enough, that the cause is not set.
Oh, so we leave that up to our
At,
own discretion, I guess.
Well, I was going to say maybe that's the karma, is that you're going to, let's say you're going to die at 48. So
Mhm.
how are you going to get there? Maybe you're going to burn the candle at both ends and
Have
use
a
up
heart
all your
attack or
energy.
something. Hmm.
Yeah, a heart attack, and maybe you'll get a cancer death, or maybe you'll have an accident, or maybe yourself, you'll do it yourself. Maybe you do it yourself anyways, whether it's a suicide or not.
Hmm.
But it's interesting that the moment is set, but the cause isn't. And I'd never really heard that before. I kind of believe and don't believe everything. I
Hmm.
mean, I believe that, but I mean, if it's not true, then I'm okay with that too.
Yeah.
But I kind of believe that. And yes, I think there's a blueprint. I think that there's a collective energy. I talk about it with clients when they're trying to understand their life and their karma, and why are things so difficult. And I say, well, let's imagine that there's a card table, in heaven, and we sit down with our mentor, whether that's God or whatever it is, and God, he or she says, okay, well, you got a life coming up. What do you think? And you say, well, I don't know. And God says, well, you remember 6 lifetimes ago when you da 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 da, and you say, yeah, I kind of remember. And he says, well, how about we kind of work on that this time? And we kind of say, well, okay. And then boom, then you're in the birth
And then you're birthed.
chamber. Then you're in the birth canal.
And then
So
you're regretting your decision.
well, the system is you forget that you had a decision, so that you
Exactly.
don't
Exactly. Well,
because
that's,
you'd back out.
yeah, you can at that point. Well, I guess you could have missed. That's probably maybe why miscarriages happen and those types of
Yeah,
things. Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You're
Yeah,
like, I'm
and
terrified.
the miscarriage, you maybe have already satisfied the karma for that birth, for
Yeah.
that lifetime.
Yeah, you're right. Well, that was a cool. Thank you for sharing all that. I've never heard that before about, I kind of figured that we knew our birth and our death, but I never really thought about us not necessarily knowing. But it's all about the journey, right? And it's all about our own decisions and our choices that we make in the lifetime. So I could see why our type of death would change or could be open, that's neat.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that the method is unsure, that your karma is such that at a certain date and time, and maybe I don't think place is set, maybe place is set, doesn't matter. But let's just say at a certain time and date, that is the end. And then, you know, like you're reading a really interesting book, and you know that you've only got 5 pages, but you still don't know how it's going to end. But you know that it's only got 5 more pages, and how everything, 5 pages to go, nothing is resolved, and then 5 pages later everything is resolved. And so it's somehow that's what happens.
It's like those
I tell
books back
people,
in the 80s, the Mad Libs. I don't know if you remember those, but it was a story and you could change the
Yeah.
verbs, the nouns, the actions, so
Yeah.
you could have a different story every time.
Yeah. Let me tell you, they were back from the 50s.
Oh, the 50s. Okay. I just know in the 80s I used to play with them all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That we had that in the 50s too.
That's funny. So, Indra, tell us a little bit about your story. What got you into Vedic astrology? What guided you into doing readings for over 50 years?
Well, I haven't done the readings 50 years. I've been into astrology 50 years. I've been on the spiritual path 50 years. I suppose I started readings back then, but nothing like what I'm doing now. I think I got into astrology because I was mathematical as a child, and when I tell the story is that in the early 70s, when I moved to California, we found out that there were metaphysical bookstores. There was a bookstore in Berkeley, Shambhala. There was a couple of bookstores, and I think the first metaphysical bookstore was East West in the Menlo Park in California, in 1965. But so it was starting, and we had, I started having questions. I started realizing at that time in my early 20s, almost mid 20s, that I was really more interested in finding happiness and finding myself. I don't remember the things we used to say in the 70s now, but it was, it's like finding myself and coming to my inner peace and my inner child inside and all those phrases. And how we did that is we went to these metaphysical bookstores and we started buying books and reading them. And many of the first books that I bought were astrology, and I started working with that, and I studied it really deeply for about 4 years, and then it stopped. I hit a wall. I didn't know how to take it any further, and it dropped away for about 20 years. And then by then I was living in an ashram, and with an Indian teacher, not in the body Indian teacher, Indian guru, and the Vedic astrology, that the astrology talk came around. And of course, it was Vedic astrology, the astrology of India, because it was Indian. It was in America. It was in California, but it was based on Indian teachings. And so I started getting back into it. And then there was a moment in time when I knew that, let me put it another way, that I realized again that that was something that was very important to me, and it became something that I wanted to go deeper and deeper into. And I spent about 15 more years of studying astrology on deeper and deeper levels, the history, and finding my own truth with it, always being rebellious about the um, the groupthink, and always wanting to find my own way with it. And then it became my time, and overnight I started giving readings. I decided that when I got back to India, I was going to India every year, and I said at one point that when I go back to India, I'm going to put up flyers, and that's where I started. And I like to say, by the end of the fifth reading, I felt like I had achieved my goal, that I
Mhm.
was an astrologer, that my vision wasn't about world best astrologer, wasn't most famous astrologer, wasn't the most readings, it wasn't the longest reading. It was being an astrologer. And at the end of 5 readings, I had achieved that. And at the end of 1,000 readings, I was had a lot of gratitude and was very happy to do that too. But that wasn't really the goal. The goal
Mhm.
was to be able to understand it enough to be able to share it, and hopefully that it would help people. And 5 readings was enough for that.
Yeah. That's great, which led you into doing sessions and classes in the United States and in Asia.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
really neat. So, Indra, can you tell us a little bit about the services that you provide for people now?
Well, I do. I have what I call, I give what I call life readings, and these are three different modalities that I cover. I cover which we haven't talked about any of them, and that's fine. But the Enneagram of Personality, which is a typing system, that there are 9 personality types, and that we have one of them at our core, and it gives us our core triggers. It helps us to understand our personality, that our personality is incredibly patterned and frighteningly so patterned that you read in a book when once you understand which of these 9 types. They're numbered 1 through 9. They have names, but it's not hierarchical. The numbers, there's no one better than the other. They're all stinky. They're all hard, and they all, many of them look good from the outside, but they're not so good on the inside. So I take the most time going through the Enneagram personality to give you your core triggers to help you to understand your personality. Then I go through the Vedic astrology chart to give you your strengths and weaknesses. And then at the end, I spend time with this modality called the Wheel of Totality, which is the blank spots. It's the deficiencies, it's the empty houses that nobody talks about. In an astrology reading, everybody is talking about the houses that have planets,
Mhm.
but everybody has many houses that don't have planets,
Oh.
and those houses contain awarenesses, but you're not really aware of those awarenesses. And we don't actually start working on them until we're 50. And why is it 50? Because in 20s and 30s, we're mostly interested in building up our ego and our identity. And if you say to a 20-year-old, you need to open your heart, they're going to say, my heart is open. But if you say it to a 50-year-old, they're going to say, you're the third person that's told me that this week. Tell me more. That's the difference. And so at 50, we start working on the deficiencies, and these are really hard. It's the blind spots, it's the qualities of energies where we don't have planets are very important. They're very important to our upbringing. Excuse me. They're very important to our realization. They're not so important to a better life, though they can be helpful to a better life. But they're really important to our on our spiritual journey to know what it is that we don't get. And there are people that have like they have a chart. If you've got planets in 4 houses and you've got 8 houses that are empty, I like to say that you really know what you know, but you don't really have a clue about what you don't know. And again, the 20s and 30s kind of look at me blank, and the late 40s and 50s and 60s say, tell me more.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand. And so the three together are the I call the life reading. I do readings, I do location readings for people that they can decide, they can figure out the quality of a place that they're living planetarily for them, and we
Mhm.
can also find places that help people to grow in ways to find relationships for better career and such. We can find places that are more helpful for that. I do a reading that I call the spiritual progress reading. That's the Wheel of Totality, and another reading that's the Navamsha chart, which is who we eventually become. It's based on the Vedic chart. And so that's a spiritual progress reading. I also have another one I call the family dynamics, where I mean I do partnerships, relationships readings with you and a partner or you and a
Oh,
child,
nice.
but I also do family dynamics readings where we can kind of take a look at a whole bunch of people, that if we look at their Enneagram and we look at the astrology, we can help people to understand the strengths and weaknesses of their relationships, that we can take the emotion out of relationships and get them to understand. And I like to say, well, I will say this in a regular reading, but in this reading, I like to say that when you understand, like you, it's really easy as a child to have difficulty with your parent, but when you get an understanding of their parent and what
Yes.
they had to go through to help to understand what formed them, and imagine your grandparent, which you may have a great relationship, but you imagine them as your parent, meaning you're the you're your parent. then it brings more compassion and more understanding into those relationships, both to the grandparent and then their parent and your parent and their parent, your grandparent, and then yourself. And so those are a few of the readings that I do for people besides the counseling.
That's awesome. And so, I know we didn't go into much detail about the Enneagram of Personality or the Wheel of Totality, but where can people find you to learn more? Because it sounds like you do a very in-depth reading, or you do several different in-depth readings. Is there a website that people can go to learn more? Because I know you've done a lot of different podcasts that have probably talked a little bit more in detail of those other types of modalities, but I was kind of feeling the Vedic astrology today and really diving into that.
Absolutely. So I have a website, indrarinzler.com, that people can check out what I've done there. If you want the podcasts, they're on if you go to my Facebook under my name, I have a public and a person. You can check either one, but I put a lot of the podcasts are posted there. I will offer any of the listeners two free offerings. If you send me your birth date, time, and place, I will send you your Vedic chart, and I will send you a little bit of a cheat sheet so that you can understand a little bit how to read it. And I'll probably make a comment or two. It's not a reading, but it's your chart, and then you can kind of look from there. And if you're interested, you can see the difference between your Western and your Vedic. And I will also send you a test so that you can figure out your Enneagram number, or at least begin to figure out your Enneagram number. That is also free. The test is three simple paragraphs. It's about a 5 or 10 minute test. Max, in order to figure out, and some people won't figure out, but they'll start to get an idea of where to look. If not, many people will get a number, and some people will not quite be able to figure it out because they don't know themselves well enough. There are people, because of their astrology, that I'm sure you've met these people, that they're one of their biggest challenges is that they have to understand who they are,
Mhm.
that they're a mix of things, and grounding themselves in themselves is 70% of the work that they do in this life. Once they figure that out, they've actually then come a long ways already. They know which of the images, like a photograph with multiple images, they know
Yeah.
which one of the images is them, and that's really important. So for them, figuring out Enneagram is a little bit harder, but the test, even a 5 or 10 minute test, will help them to begin to know where to look if they're interested in it, uh, and then go from there.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Indra, for offering that. That for all of you out there, utilize that. He's offering this to you. Get out there, check out his website, indrarinzler.com. Reach out to him, get that information. It can be very valuable. I know for me, I did a reading when I lived in Florida. I had lived there for 20 years. I lived in New York for 20 years, lived in Florida for 20, and then I was guided to move out to the Pacific Northwest. And I had realized that my Florida years were, developing that identity or that ego, the really, in those years. And then moving out here to the Pacific Northwest is more developing the spirituality aspect in my life. And so I think it's imperative for us to even understand that where we live plays a role in where we're at, in our life cycle as well. So I like that you do those readings too. That was very helpful for me when I was feeling the pull to move. I didn't know where to go. And I knew
Did you do a location reading?
I did. I
Yeah.
had a really close friend who said, "Hey, I'll do a location reading for you." And immediately knew I was being pulled out to the Pacific Northwest. I just didn't know where. And boom, she honed right in to this location where I am. And I tell you, these 5 years I've been here has all been about my intuition and spirituality and growing my, understanding energy. And so it's been very positive for me in that growth aspect. Yeah. Hmm.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a great testimonial. Yeah, they can be really helpful to understand the characteristics of where you are and what you're going through. I do. The reality of it is that we bring our baggage with us. So
Yeah, we
even in
do.
a location reading, I do spend time on their natal chart, because they got to understand, because it's not you have to understand that being in the place is helpful, but that isn't the only. You still have to do your work.
Of course. Yeah, 100. Believe me, I've learned that.
No, I'm not saying about you, but I mean the idea is that there are many there is, like in all probably every modality, but in astrology there are a lot of people that want to cookie cutter it,
Yeah,
and so if you want happiness you go to your Jupiter line. Well, that doesn't work for everybody. The lines have meaning, and they have general how they'll affect you, but if you're not ready to accept that lesson, it's not going to do you. It's going to frustrate you more than it's going
it
to help
will.
you.
Yeah, you're right.
So you have to. I mean, in order to do this, you've got to really understand what's going on. I had a location client at the end of last week, and she said she was looking for freedom. She wrote me 4 pages of notes about where she'd lived. I'd never seen that before. It's
Holy cow.
beautiful. Yeah, it was beautiful. And at the end, I said, the question is, what are you looking for? And she says, freedom. And so one of the first things I told her is that freedom is an inside job.
Yeah, it doesn't
Because,
matter where you live.
yeah, because the freedom that she was looking for wasn't about the place. She was feeling it she was feeling free and unfree in places, but it had to do with how they accepted her and how they didn't accept her, and her understanding of that, um, of the reality of that would have will enable her to be able to be succeed where she does decide to go.
Yeah.
And she I forget how far into the reading she was, but I remember that she stopped and she said, "This is deep." And I said, "Yeah, that's what I do. That it's that's why it took me 40 years to become a to give professional readings, is because it wasn't my plan, but the plan was is that I was going to do it with the intuition to really be able to help people rather than just to share what I knew."
Yeah, and that's so beneficial. And Indra, thank you so much for coming on the show and for just explaining a lot about Vedic and just in general about all the topics that we kind of touched on today. I know it's tough in an hour show to really get too deep, but I feel like we at least were able to cover a certain amount for people who might have no clue, like myself. I just know, like I said, I know the basic sun, moon, rising, but thank you for going into detail on the houses and just these other concepts that come up when you are learning about astrology. And I know there's probably so much more in depth that you could go into with your 40 plus years of experience, but thank you for sharing your wisdom today and coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.